There comes a moment in life when the loudest person in the room realizes silence carries more weight than words. When reactions slow down. When explanations feel unnecessary. When proving yourself feels like a job you finally quit. This is not retreat. This is evolution. Because people who have outgrown their pain don't need to announce it. They live it. They stop chasing validation from places that once wounded them. They stop arguing with minds that are committed to misunderstanding them. And most importantly, they stop bleeding in rooms that taught them how to heal. Strength at the beginning is noisy. It needs to be seen, heard, confirmed. But strength that has survived storms learns something deeper. Not every battle deserves your voice. Not every opinion deserves your energy. And not every door that closes needs to be forced open again. Growth teaches you restraint. Pain teaches you awareness. And wisdom teaches you when to step back. Not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand your worth. Watch closely and you'll notice it. The ones who used to explain themselves now listen. The ones who reacted now pause. The ones who once needed the crowd now choose solitude with intention. This isn't bitterness. This is clarity. They didn't lose their fire. They learned how to control it. They didn't become cold. They became selective. And they didn't disappear. They simply moved to a higher ground where chaos can't reach them. This is the quiet power of becoming whole. When your peace matters more than being right. When your future matters more than revisiting old wounds. When you realize that stepping back isn't giving up, it's leveling up. And once you understand this, you stop trying to be understood by everyone and start standing firmly in who you've become. Real growth rarely announces itself with noise or celebration, because the most meaningful changes happen internally, away from the spotlight. In the early stages of life, people often associate progress with recognition, praise, and visible wins. They want applause to confirm that they are moving forward, that their struggle meant something, that their effort was seen. But as maturity deepens, a powerful shift takes place. You begin to realize that not everything valuable needs an audience. The strongest transformations don't demand claps, likes, or approval, because they are rooted in self-awareness rather than external validation. Silence becomes a sign of confidence, not insecurity. When someone has truly grown, they no longer feel the urge to explain themselves at every turn or defend their choices to those who never supported them. They understand that constant talking is often a cover for doubt, while quiet action reflects certainty. Growth teaches you that peace is louder than arguments and progress speaks louder than promises. You stop chasing attention and start protecting your energy because you finally understand how costly distraction can be. There's a calm that comes with knowing who you are and where you're going. That calm doesn't need to compete or compare. It doesn't rush to prove a point or react to every opinion. Instead, it observes, evaluates, and moves with intention. People who have outgrown their pain don't feel the need to revisit old battles just to show how strong they've become. They know what they survived, and that knowledge is enough. Their silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. It is the result of lessons learned the hard way and boundaries built with care. Applause can be addictive, but it can also be misleading. It trains people to perform instead of evolve, to seek approval instead of alignment. Growth breaks that cycle. It shifts your focus from being admired to being grounded. You begin to value consistency over recognition, discipline over excitement, and inner stability over external noise. This is why real growth often goes unnoticed by the crowd. It doesn't announce itself on arrival. It shows up quietly in better decisions, calmer reactions, and a stronger sense of self. When growth reaches this level, silence becomes a choice, not a consequence. You speak when it matters and stay quiet when it doesn't. You let results do the talking and let time reveal the truth. And in that silence, you find something applause could never give you, a deep, unshakable confidence that doesn't depend on who's watching. Healing does not simply change how a person feels on the inside. It completely rewires how they respond to the outside world. When pain is still fresh, reactions are fast, emotional, and often defensive. Every comment feels personal, Every disagreement feels like an attack, and every setback reopens old wounds. But as healing takes place, something subtle yet powerful begins to shift. You may still feel emotions, but they no longer control your behavior. The pause between stimulus and response grows longer, and in that space, wisdom starts to lead. A healed mind no longer needs to react to everything. It understands that not every situation deserves a response, and not every provocation deserves attention. This doesn't mean the person has become indifferent or numb. It means they have gained perspective. They can now separate what is happening from what it reminds them of. The past loses its grip, and the present becomes clearer. Instead of reacting from old pain, they choose actions based on values, goals, and self-respect. One of the most visible signs of healing is emotional regulation. Where there was once anger, there is now restraint. Where there was once anxiety, there is now observation. Healed individuals don't suppress emotions. They acknowledge them without allowing them to dictate their behavior. They feel deeply, but they move deliberately. This change often confuses others, especially those who were used to provoking a reaction. Silence replaces arguments. Calm replaces chaos. And that calm is not weakness, it is mastery. Healing also changes how people interpret the actions of others. Instead of immediately assuming bad intentions, they recognize that everyone is acting from their own level of awareness. This understanding reduces resentment and increases compassion, not in a way that invites mistreatment, but in a way that sets healthy boundaries. You stop taking things personally because you realize most behavior says more about the person acting than the person receiving it. This realization is freeing. It removes the emotional burden of constantly defending yourself. As reactions soften, clarity strengthens. Decisions become cleaner, conversations become more intentional, and relationships become more honest. You no longer need to raise your voice to be heard or dramatize your pain to be understood. Healing teaches you that your power lies not in how intensely you react, but in how wisely you respond. And when you reach this stage, people notice something different about you, not because you're louder, but because you're steady, composed, and no longer controlled by what once hurt you. Distance is often misunderstood as avoidance, coldness, or fear, but in reality, distance can be one of the highest forms of intelligence. When someone has lived through manipulation, emotional exhaustion, or constant conflict, they eventually learn that proximity to everything is not strength. Wisdom teaches restraint. It teaches that access to your time, energy, and emotions is a privilege, not a right. Stepping back is not running away. It is choosing not to stay where growth is repeatedly disrupted. In earlier stages of life, many people believe endurance means staying, tolerating, and absorbing whatever comes their way. They confuse patience with self-sacrifice and loyalty with self-neglect. But experience reshapes that belief. You begin to see that constantly explaining yourself, justifying your boundaries, or fixing situations you didn't break slowly drains your sense of self. Distance becomes the pause that protects you. It allows clarity to replace confusion and calm to replace chaos. Wisdom understands that not every relationship, conversation, or environment deserves continued access. Some situations only exist to test your boundaries, not to reward your effort. When you step back, you give yourself the space to observe instead of react. You see patterns instead of isolated incidents. You recognize cycles that once trapped you emotionally. From that perspective, it becomes easier to make decisions rooted in self-respect rather than guilt or obligation. Stepping back does not mean shutting down emotionally or becoming detached from the world. It means being intentional. You learn when to engage and when to disengage. You realize that constantly being available makes you vulnerable to being misused. Distance restores balance. It gives you room to hear your own thoughts again, to reconnect with your values, and to move without the pressure of external noise. This is where wisdom matures, quietly, steadily, without drama. People who do not understand this often label distance as weakness because they still measure strength by confrontation and dominance. But true strength knows when silence preserves dignity better than words. It knows when absence speaks louder than arguments. It knows that peace is not found in winning every interaction, but in choosing the ones worth your presence. As growth deepens, you stop chasing closure from people who refuse to change and stop seeking validation from spaces that no longer align with who you are becoming. Distance becomes less about others and more about honoring yourself. It is the realization that you don't need to attend every fight you're invited to, and you don't need to remain close to anything that repeatedly costs you your peace. In the beginning, power often feels like volume. It shows itself through dominance, control, and the need to be noticed. People speak louder, react faster, and assert themselves constantly because they believe visibility equals influence. This kind of power is restless. It needs resistance to feel real and opposition to stay alive. But as a person matures, their understanding of power evolves. They begin to realize that real authority does not need to announce itself, and real confidence does not depend on intimidation or noise. Calm is what power looks like when it no longer feels threatened. A composed presence signals that someone is secure in who they are and what they stand for. They don't rush to correct every misunderstanding or defend every decision. They understand that explanations are only necessary when there is mutual respect. This restraint is not passive. It is deliberate. It is the discipline of choosing impact over impulse and stability over ego. Mature power listens more than it speaks. It observes before it acts. Instead of reacting emotionally, it responds strategically. This calm presence often unsettles those who rely on chaos or control because it cannot be easily manipulated. When someone remains steady in moments that once triggered them, it becomes clear that they are no longer operating from fear. Their calm becomes a boundary. It sets the tone without needing to raise a voice. There's also a humility in this kind of power. It no longer seeks to dominate every space or win every exchange. It understands that influence grows through consistency, integrity, and example, not force. People begin to respect it not because they're pressured, but because they sense its depth. This respect is quieter, but it is stronger and more lasting. It does not disappear when attention fades because it was never built on performance. As power matures, it shifts from proving to preserving. You stop trying to show how strong you are and start focusing on staying strong. You choose long-term peace over short-term validation. You invest in self-control, emotional intelligence, and clarity. Knowing these qualities creates stability that no amount of loud assertion can match. Calm becomes your signature, not because you lack intensity, but because you have learned how to direct it. This evolution changes how others experience you. Your presence alone carries weight. Your silence creates space. Your words, when spoken, land with precision because they are rare and intentional. In a world addicted to noise, calm stands out as undeniable strength, showing that true power is not about being the loudest voice, but about being unshaken in any room you walk in. A certain stage of growth, something profound shifts inside a person. The need to protect peace becomes stronger than the need to win. Early on, being right feels important. Proving a point feels necessary. Getting the last word feels like victory. But with experience, it comes the understanding that many arguments don't lead to resolution. They lead to exhaustion. You start to see how much energy is wasted trying to convince people who are committed to misunderstanding you. And in that realization, priorities change. Peace becomes more valuable than validation. Not because you no longer care, but because you care more wisely. You recognize that inner stability is fragile when constantly exposed to conflict, drama, and emotional tug-of-war. So instead of engaging in every disagreement, you begin to ask a different question. Is this worth my calm? Often, the answer is no. Walking away no longer feels like defeat. It feels like self-respect. This stage of growth teaches you that being right doesn't always mean being fulfilled. You can win an argument and still lose your peace. You can prove a point and still feel drained afterward. Over time, you realize that silence can be a stronger response than explanation, and letting go can be more powerful than holding on. Peace is no longer something you hope to find after chaos. It becomes something you actively protect. Choosing peace also means accepting that not everyone will understand your boundaries, and that's okay. Growth isn't about being agreeable to everyone. It's about being aligned with yourself. When peace leads, decisions become clearer. You stop revisiting old wounds just to justify your healing. You stop reopening chapters that cost you your mental and emotional well-being. You learn that closure does not always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from distance and acceptance. This shift creates a quieter, stronger version of you. You become less reactive and more intentional. You don't need to dominate conversations or defend your choices to feel secure. Your confidence no longer depends on approval because it's rooted in self-trust. Peace becomes your standard, and anything that threatens it is evaluated carefully. In a world that rewards loud opinions and constant reactions, choosing peace is a radical act of maturity. It is the understanding that your energy is limited and your future deserves it more than pointless conflict. And if this message resonates with you, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.